for today's workshop session, session 3, Intro to React. And take a moment to fill out the signing form so that we have more idea about, who the audience are composed of, and we can better organize our events in the future. Link to slides. Oh, actually, I'll give you one more moment to scan that. Sorry about that.
And this sign-in form is also linked in the Discord. It's pinned. It's the same sign-in sheet every week, just change the date.
And link to this very specific slide. All right. Just a quick recap of the entire curriculum for Hackschool. So this week we are going to cover a little bit about basic React. And as you can see here, we have a lot more, fun topics coming up in the later part of this quarter. So hopefully I'll, be seeing you guys still in those workshops. But yeah, let's get started into a little bit of React. Our agenda today, we have actually a lot of topics to cover. So the first thing that we want to talk about is basically just a short introduction about what is a React project. And we'll try to start one very simple, very straightforward, as you will be able to see. The next thing that we want to cover is something called JSX. So if you have not heard about it, don't be worried, don't be concerned. If you have been to our previous workshops, you'll find that very similar to what we have taught before, something called JavaScript and another thing called HTML. So the learning curve isn't deep. Some other concepts that we are going to cover are components and props. So we'll be talking more about what that means, particularly inside the realm of React. And finally, we're going to get a bit more advanced into the idea of state and statefulness in React. So yeah, to start with, what is React? I'm sure that our two, event directors have covered this a little bit in our first session, but basically just as a recap, React is a free open source JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So I've highlighted the parts inside this very short intro that might be a bit confusing. So to start with, library is basically just a set of tools. So it's a set of pre-written code or files or whatever that you can just plug and use in your own project. So they're like wheels that have been built by the previous, coders or programmers that you don't have to rebuild by yourself. Another one is user interfaces, i.e. UI. So this is something that a user can interact with on the web page. So if I just, leave this presentation right now, you can see that I'm, in a browser apparently, and everything here I can click and something will happen and respond to my interaction, and these are all part of the user interface. So I guess the most major reason that we are using and we are teaching React in this workshop and in our websites and everything internally is because React is actually really an industry standard. So a lot of the daily apps and websites that we're using are actually built with React. But to be an industry standard, there has to be some benefits to using it, and React provide actually these benefits. So the first one is something called reusable components. This is something that we will be talking more about in the later part of this workshop. But aside from the reusability, we also have something called the efficient update. So basically what this means is that when you have to make some changes to this current website, instead of making the changes by reloading the entire thing, React will only change or update the individual components that are affected. And as you can imagine, that saves a lot of time and resources and makes our website or app or project extremely efficient. And the other thing that React has is flexibility. So as long as you have mastered all the technologies or skills that is needed to build a React project, you'll be able to use that skill to build not only static sites but also mobile apps and even desktop apps as well. And the projects and the website and the apps that you build can be viewed from these different platforms as well. So really flexible. And again, in the end, it's a really high demand skill in the industry. So you would definitely want to have that keyword, on your resume saying that, of course, the skill section, you have something called React, and also in your description, in your bullet, you may also want to mention that you have used React in your project or in your previous work experience. All right, so let's get started. I asked Lorelai to prep you in advance when we are dealing with the technical difficulty, but don't worry if you haven't had the time to do that. But to make sure that our demo or your project is running, smoothly, make sure that you have all of these things downloaded to your laptop. The first thing is a text editor. So seriatically, any text editor would work as long as you're comfortable with them. But for our demo, for our purposes, we'll be using something called Visual Studio Code. And I'm sure that if you have been coming to our previous workshops, you will have that already downloaded on your laptop. But if you have not, don't worry about it. You can just click on this link, go to this website, and I'm sure that they will be providing some sort of downloading links. Another thing is web browser. So again, any web browser would work, just that we are using Chrome for our purpose. And Chrome also provide a lot of very convenient developer tools. So that's why we have a preference toward Chrome. The third thing is something that I would not expect you guys to have already on your laptop, and it is called Node.js. So, sorry about that. Don't worry too much if you don't really know what that does. Honestly, I don't really know what Node.js does, like in very specific details, but just as an overview, like a high-level explanation, Node.js allows us to have a development server where we can see the effect of our code in real time. So to give more explanation, in the past, in like a couple of decades ago, there are these web developers, there are these app developers, and what they would do is that they would write the source code, and they would have to go through a lengthy process, a pipeline, similar to like a conversion or like a interpretation pipeline, to make sure that they can see the final effect of their code. And if they make any changes to that source code, they would have to go through that lengthy pipeline again. Fortunately for us, we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that lengthy wait every single time. With the help of Node.js, we can just make our changes and we'll be able to see our changes real time in the web browser. So pretty cool, very helpful. Make sure that you have it downloaded. You can go to this website that is linked to download the version that is the most appropriate one for your laptop and for your architecture. Sure. So can I get a show of hands of people who actually got time to have this downloaded before my presentation? And is there anyone who need more time and they're still working on it? Okay, so the rest of you, I assume that you have some way to figure it out. So let's get started. Okay, let me see how to do this. So the first step, we are going to take it really easy, really slowly. So the first step that we are going to do is to create a folder anywhere you want on your laptop. It could be our desktop, it could be in your downloads, literally anywhere. Just don't use spaces in the folder name. So I know this is something that doesn't sound like a very valid request, but as long as you have spaces in your folder name, there will be problems when you're trying to do some commands in the terminal. So we would like to avoid that. So don't put spaces in your name, in your folder name. And the second thing that you want to do is to open that newly created folder in VS Code. So to do that, I'll actually just create. Okay, let me do this again. So I am at my start page, and let me just open this folder that I have already on my desktop that is called Hackschool F25. And so I am in this folder now. So I have some files in your folder, but if yours is an empty folder, it won't really have anything. Makes sense. That was our first step, and the second step is to actually create the React app. It's actually pretty straightforward. All you need to do is to just run this single line of command called npm create vite at latest. So I guess just to provide more insights into what it does. So npm is a command that is provided by the Node.js that we have just downloaded, and create means create, and vite means fast. It's another framework or tool that you don't have to worry about, but it means fast. So hopefully it'll be fast. And at latest basically just means that we are using the latest version, which is always good. So actually I'll just run this command again just to show you guys how it looks like. So I'm inside this folder of mine Let me make sure that you guys cannot see this. Does this work for people in the back? And you guys all see it? Okay, pretty cool. So yeah, let me just run this command. I've copy pasted into my terminal. If you don't have a terminal, don't worry about it. You can open a new one by clicking, here, terminal and new terminal, and a new one will pop up. But let me just run this real quick. So here it's prompting me to create a project name. So for my name, I'll just name it with something like demo. But for your project, if you want to, be more serious about it, you might want to give it like a fancier name. But yeah, so after choosing my project name, I'll be prompted to, or I am being prompted to select a framework. So for our purpose, we want to use the third one, React. And as you can see, this command actually supports a lot of other frameworks, some of which you might, get into contact with later. Then you can also use the same command. So React, and for the variant, we are going to go with JavaScript. And using road, if you're using road on V, I am not completely sure what that means, but since this is experimental, I don't trust this fully, so I'm gonna go with no. So install with npm and start now. I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. You could say no, and we'll have some other alternatives later on. So yeah, as you can see, it's just running this command and a lot of warnings. Don't worry about it. Programmers never care about warnings, but okay, should not have said that. But yeah, so as you can see right now, I have a new folder called demo, and if you open it, you can see that there are actually a lot of files that is automatically generated for me by running this command. So we can take a closer look. So to start with, it has a README. So this README basically just contains some introduction about this technology stack that we're using. And but that is actually not important for our purpose. For our purpose, what is the most interesting and important is this src folder. So src is short for source. This is where we will be writing all of our source code and making all of changes and basically just like 90% of the things that we are doing during development. So if we go to source, we'll see that there is a app.jsx and some CSS files and a main. Don't worry about it. The fun thing that this command does, besides creating these files, is that it actually starts the project for you. So this is something that I figured out recently. So after you have finished running that command, there will be sort of a URL over here called localhost 5173. You can go ahead and command click on this to follow the link, and you'll see that there is actually some sort of website already running. So if you take a closer look, you'll see that this website corresponds to the code that is written currently in the source folder. So we don't really care about these codes because they're just boilerplate code, but it's just pretty funny that they already started this product for you. And you can just call yourself having already started a website or written a website, because this is basically just a website. But yeah, again, this piece of command, it just creates a React project with all the necessary tools for it to run correctly. Is anyone trying to run this command? Is everything going well? Is there any kind of error or anything like that, or any kind of questions so far? Go ahead.
A little lost.
From which part? Okay, yeah, I think Lorelai will go help. Okay, besides him, is everyone else doing all right, or? So what you have downloaded should be like a installer, so you should be able to run that installer, so you can't find that installs.
So it's not.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Okay, is there anyone who actually successfully ran this command? Just, okay, sounds good. Just to make sure that I am not the one who's tripping or anything. Okay, we can continue then, because we do have a lot of stuff to go over today. So, I just said that, by running this starting or like initiating or creating command, your project will be automatically started before this command, ends or finishes running. However, if you selected no in the very last step, it won't start it for you. So you have to start it by yourself. So to start it by yourself is also pretty straightforward. You only need these 2 lines of code. The first line is cd space your app name that you selected for your project. So cd is short for change directory. It basically means that you are switching your current working directory to the folder that you specify over here, basically your app name or your project name. And the second command would just be npm run dev. So don't worry about, what it does, underlying mechanism or things like that. Basically, it just starts your app and, keep it running. And if you're done with your development, what you can do is you can press Control or Command C, or actually Control C, so that you can see now I can just enter a new command or whatever, and my previous command has been terminated. And if I go back to that previous URL, you see that this site can be reached. That is because I've stopped my project from running anymore. And if I want, I can just restart it by doing cd demo and npm run dev. So yeah, I can still go back to the same URL and see my website running again on this URL. All right, so that took longer than I expected, but that was our first part of, just basic introduction to React and how to start the bare bone React project. Any questions so far, or any new like errors, things like that? Okay. Does everyone need like a couple of minutes to actually like work on this, or wait, Laura, what is the problem?
It's just downloading.
Okay.
Just so the PS Code there.
Okay, yeah.
I opened it and then I don't know wherever. Oh.
Okay. I guess our officer or Jeff and Lorelai can just help with our help with their problems, and we can just keep going. Yeah, so the second thing on our agenda for today is called JSX. Jeff, a little bit. Like, yes. I don't want to shout. Anyway, so JSX, that sounds very intimidating, and that is exactly how I felt about it when I first saw it, because it sounded absolutely like a new language, and I don't want to learn a new language at any time. But the good news is it's actually not a completely new language. It is a add-on to JavaScript, so it is an extension of JavaScript. Be more specific, it is the combination of HTML and JavaScript. So it gives React the feel of HTML with the power of JavaScript. I know that sounds very abstract, but there will be a concrete example later on or very soon. So over here, I have a very typical JSX code. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, we have this thing that looks really like a piece of HTML code. I have this tag h1, I have text, I have a closing tag h1. However, on the left-hand side, I have something more like a JavaScript code. I have a const keyword saying that this is a const variable. I have a variable name called message, and I also have the equal sign, which is the assignment operator. So this is what I meant by saying that it is more of a combination of HTML and JavaScript. So JSX is very commonly used within React, and it is used to describe what the user interface should look like. And we'll be able to see more examples of that in our demo later on. So yeah, I know this is not super pleasing, but we have more JSX coming up. I promise this is going to be really short because there aren't many JSX that we're going to need. But something that we do need is this very special representation of expressions inside JSX. So over here in the first example, you'll be able to see that I have two variables set up. The first variable is called name, and it is set to my name called Shiyu. And the second variable name is message, and it is set to this, kind of like HTML code. It is a header, and it says hi. And the second part is name, but it is surrounded by curly braces. So the curly braces is telling our compiler or interpreter that this is a variable, and I want you to treat, or I want you to convert this variable into the value of the variable when you're trying to, compile this code. So the final value that this message variable will have in the end is hi Shiyu instead of hi literal string curly braces names closing curly braces, if that makes sense. So if I'm printing this message out, it'll be hi Shiyu. What's even more interesting is that this does not only work for strings or numbers like this, it also works for functions. So for example, over here, I have a function that is called name function. It doesn't take in any argument because of the empty brackets. However, it does return a string called hack. And I can do the same thing with this function. I can put that in the curly braces, and I can embed that within another length or within another message. And the final value for this elements variable will be the therefore I love hack instead of I love name function, stuff like that. So should be pretty straightforward. We have more examples coming up. So I don't know how many of you know like who he is, but this is Powellcat. Anyways, this is just an example, but so here in the first example, we're having a separate variable URL that stores the URL to this image. So we all know that, in HTML, if we want to, create an image element, what we will do is that we will use this image tag, and we will provide the URL of the image that we want to insert in the source attribute. So it will do something like this, like image source equals to URL. However, another way to do that is to set up a separate variable for URL, basically what we're doing here. So const URL equals to this URL. And we can use curly braces inside the actual image component or actual image tag to tell the compiler that we want the source to be this URL. So that is actually all the JSX syntax that we want to cover, or I want to cover in this workshop. Definitely not too much. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. Yeah, so I guess just as like more background information, don't worry about not understanding what I'm going to say, because it absolutely does not matter. This is just for people who are curious about how the underlying mechanism work. So if you're wondering about how all these JSX code turns into what our users see, what happens is that all these JSX code that we write, these JSX components, are first converted or are first built into this JavaScript code. And then the JavaScript code is taken by our web browser, and the web browser runs an engine on it. And the engine generates HTML code based on the JavaScript code. And from the HTML to the user, I believe we covered that during our previous workshops. Basically, on the browser, takes the HTML, builds a DOM tree, and arrange all the elements on the website, and the user can see all the elements on the website according to that HTML code. So again, definitely don't feel pressured. Definitely don't feel that you have to understand this. This is a high-level overview of how this works under the hood. All right, so that was all about JSX. Okay, I think we're doing all right in terms of timing. The next thing that we want to talk about is component. I've actually hinted at this idea a couple of times in a previous part of my presentation, but a component is exactly what enables us to reuse code inside React. And as I said, reusability is a very important factor in React, and it's something that makes it popular and makes it actually usable. So it's sometimes people say that components are basic building blocks of React, but what it does, like in its very basic form, is just like functions. So it accepts input as props, which is something that we want to talk about later on. it takes these inputs as props and it returns a React element. So here are two Facebook posts. So there are two very different Facebook posts. I'm saying that they're very different because apparently they're posted by different accounts. They have different captions. They have different images. They have different like counts, comments. Everything is just so different. But if you just look closely enough, you'll be able to see that they still share a lot of common traits or common parts. So to start with, they all have a section called account info. They all have a section of caption. They all have a section of image. They all have reactions, and they all have actions. What is even more interesting is that if you look, closely into the account info section, you'll be able to see that they also share some, common traits or common parts. So they all have a profile picture, an account name, and also a timestamp that when the post is made. So if I were to kind of just program that out in terms of HTML, probably I'll choose, an image tag for the picture. I'll choose some kind of a header for account name and a paragraph type for timestamp. So this is an observation that the programmers have made. They realized that we can just group repeated HTML elements together into components. So we don't have to type out, image, header, paragraph every single time we want to create a post, or every single time we want to create an account information. So what we do is we just build this like blueprint and we just fill in the necessary information with this blueprint, and it will kind of just automatically generate this account information for us. So that is the high level idea of what a component does or what is a component. In terms of the more specific code, the way that we are doing it. So actually there are a lot of ways, or there are more than one way to write a component inside React. The way that we're using and the way that we're teaching today is something called functional components. So feel free to look up what are the other ways, but this is the way that we're going to teach. So by functional components, we mean that this is a JavaScript function, but under the hood, it is actually a component. So this might sound very weird and abstract, but let's take a look at this example over here. So over here, I have something that if you take like a first look, it really is just a function. So it has the function keyword, it has the function name called movie, it has, brackets. Basically, right now it's empty because it's not taking any arguments. It also has, curly brackets, and it has a return statement. So everything just looks like a normal function. What differs it, or what makes this a component is that, inside here, the return statement, we are actually returning a block of HTML components or HTML tags or this HTML elements. So these are the repeated HTML elements. To start with, we have the image, we have a header, and we have a paragraph. So that is what I mean by saying that we are grouping different HTML elements together and we're returning it, and that makes it a component. So if you try to code it out, this component will look something like this. So in terms of our actual, code, let me actually just, demo it real quick. Let me start this app running and take a look at this. So here I have still all the boilerplate code. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just to remove all these boilerplate code. So I'm going to remove everything in here in app.jsx. Remove everything in here. And what else? I think this should be fine. Okay, so if I go back, you'll see that there isn't anything left because I basically removed everything, so that makes sense. We'll start from there. We'll start from this blank project. So to start with, okay, let me actually remove this asset as well because we don't need that. So to start with, we want to create this, component that we have just kind of looked at. So to do that, what we want to do is to create it under the source folder, but we don't just directly create this file. For common best practices, we would create a new folder to store all of our components. So typically you would have a lot of components in your React project. So this is a good thing to do to like kind of make your repo look better, like make it more organized, basically by creating a separate file for all the components that you have. So inside this components file, I'll have something called movie.jsx. So this is the file that we will use to write this component. So basically here, I actually have this code already written for the sake of time. Let me just copy paste this in and I can basically just explain to you what it does. So the first thing that it does is import CSS. So the CSS file is called movie.css. So basically what that means is that every styling configuration that is related to this movie component, I have put it inside movie.css. So I don't have that file right now, but it is also something that I have prepared earlier. So I have it here. Let me actually just copy paste it here so that it works also in this case. So this is movie.css. It has some styling for my component. And going back to movie.jsx, you can see that we start again with function movie, like basically how to create a function. However, we are returning this block of HTML elements. We have image, and this image has a specific source. If you kind of visit this source, you'll be able to see a Captain America poster or something like that. And also has a header that contains the movie's name. So Captain America, the first Avenger, and it also has like a very brief description of what this movie is about. So you can read it if you're interested. So yeah, so that is basically very straightforward how we create a component. However, if you go to this demo here and you refresh it, there is nothing showing up. Is there anything wrong? There is certainly something wrong, but it is not, something wrong with what we have already done. It's something that we have not done. So to actually use this component that we have written, you would have to first export it inside this component file. So in my specific case, you'll have to add this additional line after your function definition called export default movie. So don't worry too much about what this does, like specifically, just make sure to add it for every single component that you are writing. And after exporting, you also want to import it where you want to use it. So when we're importing it, we don't import it in this file. Instead, we import it inside app.jsx. So currently app.jsx is empty, but again, I have something magical that I have written previously. Oh, actually, should be this one. So also let me update the app.css. All right, so let's go over the app.jsx file real quick. So it's pretty simple. So first to start with, similarly, we're importing this CSS file to style our web page. And inside the main app, we are having a couple more HTML elements. So we have, a header called watch list. And here I have, I am going to put in my new movie component. But to do that, I'll first have to import it. So I want to import movie from this movie.jsx file that I've already written. And then I can just use it here by doing something like this. Movie.cso does it not exist? Hate this. Maybe I should just do it without all the stalling. Okay, let me figure out what is wrong with my import. So this is my demo. Okay. Yep, actually there is something that is not right with my import path. So here I just choose the one that automatically pops up, but be very careful about just directly using what is popped up because that might be wrong. So apparently that is the case for me over here. It is not finding the correct movie component. And after I have fixed this pass over here, the error is gone. So hopefully that will work now. So yeah, over here we are seeing something that appears on our webpage. So we have this header that we are setting up here using H1, and we have another kind of a movie section that is for this specific component that we created. So it has an image, it has a name, and also has a short description. So basically, this is how you create and use a component inside a React project. So right now, as long as I have that blueprint, something that I can do very conveniently is I can just, copy paste this and create however many movies that I want. If I don't have this movie component, maybe I'll have to write this same, or maybe I have to copy this same piece of code over and over again, and that will make this file really long and really hard to read. But right now, what I'm doing is just I'm copy pasting this single line called the movie, and it's basically just doing all the copy pasting here for me. So if I go back, refresh, and I see a lot of components, so that means that we are doing great, and we are doing the component is doing its job in terms of improving reusability. So any kind of questions here? Anyone concerned about we having the same movie in our watch list? Anyone? I know we all don't want to watch Captain America for 6 times. I would not. But no offense to the real lovers. I'm just not one of them. Anyway, so that is exactly okay. I mean, no one asked, but that is exactly what we want to talk about in the next part of this workshop. Basically, how do we solve the issue that right now, even if we're reusing part of our code, it's reusing the same code. Like if we want to make something appear over and over again, it has to be the same thing that is appearing over and over again. But apparently when you're using Facebook or when you're using Instagram, all the posts that you see are different. There's no way you're seeing 10 million same posts every single day. I'm pretty sure no one will be using their app. So how are they achieving that? They're achieving that by using something called props. So the motivation for props is exactly, we don't want every movie component to play or to display the same thing. So one idea that kind of arose naturally is that we can add props to our component to display different information. So props are just similar to functional, like arguments in function. So we all know that if a function does not have any arguments passed in, it will always do the same thing. However, if you choose to pass in some, parameters, some arguments, it will display different behavior. So that is exactly the idea of a prop. So props are passed as a argument to our component. They're passing as a JavaScript object, and they will be able to modify how our component look like. So this is how a prop would look like. So if you have come to our last workshop, I believe, you'll recognize this as, or you'll be able to tell that this is in a form of a JavaScript object. So specifically, it has a name called props, and it has a couple of key value pairs. So the keys are image, title, and description, and the values are, the image source, the movie source, and the movie description. So in terms of, how we are actually using that in our project or in our code is when we're, creating or we are instantiating this movie over here. Right now, I am just doing this movie, right? I don't have any additional information provided. So one thing that I can do, or one thing that I have to do in order to use the props is to provide that additional information as the arguments. So the syntax for that is you list out the parameter name, you put an equal sign, and then you type in the value for that parameter or that argument that you want that argument to have. Wait, that was a bit convoluted. But over here, basically, if I were to basically just explain this or understand this in terms of a function, this will be a function called movie, and I am passing in 2 parameters. One parameter is title, and for this specific function call, I am giving it the value of Iron Man, and another parameter is description, and I am giving it in this case, blah. And the next component or next function call, the title is element2 and the description is blah blah. So that is first thing that we need to do. We also need to update our movie components so that it actually understands that these are like different, there are different, arguments being passed in, and it has to use that information to display it and to, update what it is doing. So over here, basically what is passed in is this props object with the title and description. And the other thing that we need to do is to update movies. So there are a couple of updates, or there are a couple of places that we need to update here. The first place is this movie props. So previously we have like a empty bracket. That means we are not passing any arguments, which is apparently not the case for us anymore. So we want to pass in props instead. So props is passed in as an object. And if we want to access any of the fields inside that object, what we need to do, as per our last workshop, is to use the dot notation. So if we want to access the title field of the props, we want to do props.title. If we want to access the description field, we want to use props.description. And here we're using this, curly braces format that I talked about briefly in the early part of this workshop. So basically we are telling the compiler that, hey, when you see this line, don't just type out props.title. Please replace this props.title with the actual value of the props.title. And same thing here with the description. So let me actually update my own code to reflect that, or to do that real quick. So just get rid of this. And again, I have something prepared for, not this. Okay, a lot of stuff prepared for. Okay, so let me just collapse this. So if you take a closer look here, instead of the original like movie, and just movie, I have each movie with different image and title and description. So I have a array or a list of different movies that I have watched or I want to watch. And these image, title, and description are the arguments that I want to pass into my new movie component. So that is the first thing that I want to change. And the second thing is, of course, the movie component itself. So here, instead of just, hard coding all this information, I want to use a more dynamic approach, basically using this curly braces over here. So what I would do is basically just replicating what I am doing over here. So here for the image, I am using the image field of the props. For the title, I'm using the title field of the props. And for the description field, I am using the description field of the props. Everything else stays the same. Here you see ID doesn't really matter. This is just for formatting and for better layout, for better visual effects. But in terms of, components and using components, it doesn't really matter. So let me go back to my website, and here you can see that I actually have this different, movies in my list. So I'm no longer always watching the single movie of Captain America. I'm actually watching different movies. So pretty cool. And this is all achieved by using components. And in this case, we have achieved the real reusability in our project. So it is no longer fake reusability. It is the real usability that we see every single day. Any questions so far? Okay. Okay, I realize that we are running out of time, but thank God we only have one more section to go, and this is gonna be a pretty short section. States is a pretty complicated field or idea or concept inside React, but we won't really be talking too much about it given our time constraint. If you're interested, I definitely would recommend reading the React documentation. I think they do a very good job explaining what that is. But if you're trying to write a really complicated or really delicate React project, this is definitely something that you will want to look into and you will want to understand more about. Our description today is more like a hook that gets you the very basic idea of what it can do. So what is a state? So state is just this variable, basically. This variable does a specific thing. It keeps track of the properties of components on our screen. So why do we have to keep track of these properties? It is because these properties might be subject to changes corresponding to user interactions. So for example, if I don't have a good example over here, let me just use the one that I've prepared. So here one example would be the Facebook like count. So we all know that if you click on the like button under a post, the like count will increase by 1. So that is something that is very likely implemented with this state idea. Another thing is stopwatch. So if you're using like a web stopwatch, if you click on stop, it will, the display will stop. And if you click on resume, it will resume. And if you click on, record the current time, it will record the current time. So these are all dynamic changes that is not possible with our current static website. So we need the state and other operations to keep track of it. So under the hood, how does this achieve is that every time the variable that keep track of the property is changed. So every time we detect a change in those variables, we will re-render the website again. So we will reload everything so that the changes are updated. So the reason why we have to use state for that is if we're using any other things that can be changed, even if they can be changed, they won't trigger a reload. So basically the changes won't show up on the web page, even though the value might actually be changed. So that may sound very weird, but we are actually going to do a short demo and you'll be able to see the concrete effect of using states in our project. So also like this thing about why not using a React or a regular JavaScript variable, if you don't understand, it's totally fine. Doesn't really matter if we're just trying to use it. So the way that we're actually going to use or employ states or add states to our React project is as follows. So useState is a separate kind of piece of functionality that doesn't just come with this basic boilerplate project. So what we need to do is to import it. So we need to import this useState from React. So this useState kind of functionality or tool is provided by React, but we have to import it. So what we want to do is just to import it here. So import useState from React. That is the first thing that we want to do. And the second thing that we want to do is to add this line called constant wash, set wash, useState false. So this might look very weird in terms of its syntax, but if we just break it down, we can see that we are still doing a variable declaration. So the variable is const, like meaning that it's supposed to be, it's the function keyword, or it's the variable keyword. And it's then we're declaring 2 variables at one call. So we're both declaring this variable called watch, and we're declaring this function called set watch. So watch is the actual variable that keeps track of the property. So in our case, it is most likely be a Boolean value that is true if I have watched this specific movie, and it's false if I have not watched it. So this element will contain the state data. And the second variable that we're creating is a function called setWatch. So quite intuitively, this is the function that we can use to update the value of watched. So if we say set watch false, it will set watch to false. And if we set watch to true, so if we call set watch true, it will set watch to true. Okay, that is kind of weird to say, but the way that we are going to kind of assign value to these 2 variables is by using something over there called useState false. So useState is basically just calling this tool that is provided by React, telling it, okay, I want to use state now, so give me these functionalities and these variables. And I am having a false over there. So the false inside the curly bracket is the default value for my state data. So you can leave it empty. However, I don't recommend doing that because leaving it empty means that you're telling the compiler, I don't want any specific starting value for my state data. So watch will be undefined initially, and we don't really want undefined values in our system. Instead of false, if you are, keeping track of something like a light count, you can initiate with 0. And if you are, keeping track of a string value, you can initiate it with a empty string. So that depends on what you're using this state for. Anyways, so yeah, it returns a 2-element array, watched and set watched. And after we have this state, we can use that to make some, updates to our project, or to add one specific fun functionality to our website. So what we want to do here is to create an image that used a watch state to show whether I have watched this movie. So if I have not watched it, so watched is false, this watched icon will be kind of like this. And if I have watched it, this icon will be changed to this. So we have some sort of dynamic behavior over here. And also, if I click on this icon, the watch state will be inverted. So if I click on it when watch is false, it will be changed to true. If I click on it when watch is true, it will be changed to false. So let me just do that real quick. Okay, where is it? All right, so okay, I don't have these images. Okay, actually, maybe I should move it to here. Yeah, it should be fine. So let's look at this another updated version of my movies component. So what I have done is here I am importing useState. And also I am importing some new things that is not really relevant to the state itself. It's just for the demo purpose. So I have a not watched image over here, and I have a watched image over here. So just for display purposes. And here I have created a, I am declaring these two variables. The first one is the state variable, watched, keeping track of the watch status. Second one is the set watch, changing or updating the watch status. And it is default to false. And I have this new function that basically just set watch to its inverted status. So if it's originally true, it will set it to false. If it's originally false, it will set it to true. So I'm calling this set watch with the invert value of the current watched value. So over here, everything else stays the same. I am just adding this new image inside every single movie component that I have. So the first thing, this again is for formatting purposes, so the ID doesn't matter. The source here, we know that normally if we want to just import any kind of, or we want to display any kind of image, what we would do is that here we would just put the URL in here. But here we want to take a more dynamic approach. So we were determining what image to show based on the value of the watched state. So this line basically means that if watched is true, we will display watched image. If it's false, we will display not watched image. And onClick is a special kind of parameter or a special just syntax that you can add to this component or to this element, saying that if I click on this element, this function will be called. So specifically here, the function that we're calling is, setting the watch status to the other status. So basically what this is doing is that every time I click on the current icon, it will trigger this change watch state function, and it will set the watch state to the inverted state. Let's look at its actual effect. All right, so as you can see, I have this new icon over here, but we don't really know if it's working yet in terms of, dynamic behavior or updating or whatever. Okay, so it seems that it is working. So every time I am clicking on this, it is updating the state. And as you can see that this state update it looks like it is persistent. So no matter what other things I am doing on this page, it is still there. Of course, if you refresh it, it will go away. So everything now is blank. If you want that to persist as well, you would need some sort of a database or other external stores to store that data. So that is out of the scope for this workshop. But here we are actually using the idea of states to add some more, fun functionalities in our app or in our project or in our website. Anyways, so recap. We have talked about a lot of stuff today. The first thing is React and JSX. So React is, again, a very popular tool for web development, while JSX is something that we are using in React. So it is something like a new language, but it is not like a new language. It is more like a JavaScript add-on. Second thing that we talked about is component. Components are basic building blocks of React, and it helps us reuse code as we have seen previously. And if we want to reuse code in an actually helpful way, we need props to further help us. It allows us to see the same component, but displaying the different information. So the same moving component, but displaying different movies actually. The last thing that we talked about, kind of in a rush in the end, is state. So state is basically just a piece of data that is stored and updated by a component. Well, I guess I am doing very well in terms of the time, but any questions? I know I kind of rushed through the last part, but again, state is very complicated, and people would, I think in the past we would have like a separate workshop just to talk about state, but this is not the case for our plan this year. So if you're interested, definitely encourage you to learn more about it. There are a lot of tutorials and helpful resources online, and I believe they will be very helpful. But any questions? Okay. Then yeah, scan this QR code and follow our Instagram, Discord if you have not. But otherwise, I guess I'll see you guys next week.
For everybody that attended, we will be up.
Am I actually recording? I hope I actually recorded.
We did have to go.
Wait, you're unmuted.
because we don't want to
I
take
am.
too much
Wait.
time.
Okay, hopefully I am unmuted.
But also, I think at the end she was going to upload all the files to a GitHub.